The bullet that grazed Austin Drake's shoulder in the summer of 1882 should have killed him, but the rancher who fired it had been too drunk to aim straight, and Austin had been too proud to press charges, even though half the town of Alta, Utah watched it happen from the safety of their shuttered windows. That single moment of mercy had branded him a coward in a place where forgiveness was mistaken for weakness. And now, 3 months later, he walked through town like a ghost that nobody wanted to acknowledge existed. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty Main Street as Austin made his way toward the general store, his boots kicking up small clouds with each step. Women gathered their skirts and turned away when they saw him coming. Men spat in the dirt and refused to meet his eyes. Even the shopkeepers served him with tight lips and hurried hands, eager to take his money, but unwilling to offer even the pretense of civility. The rancher who had shot him, a man named Caldwell with more land than sense, had spread rumors that Austin had been caught cheating at cards, sleeping with married women, stealing horses. None of it was true, but truth mattered little when a rich man wanted to save face for his own drunken violence. Austin had learned to endure the silence. He kept his head down, did his work at the small ranch he managed on the outskirts of town, and tried not to think about the life he had imagined for himself when he first arrived in Utah Territory 2 years ago. He had pictured friends, community, perhaps even a wife and family someday. Instead, he had isolation and the constant weight of unearned shame pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. The bell above the general store door chimed as he entered, and the conversation inside died immediately. Mrs. Henderson clutched her basket closer to her chest and hurried past him without a word. Old Mr. Morris pretended to be deeply fascinated by a display of canned goods. Austin grabbed what he needed quickly, paid, and was almost out the door when he heard a voice he did not recognize. "Excuse me, sir, but I believe you dropped this." He turned to find a young woman holding out a worn leather glove that did indeed belong to him. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair pinned up beneath a simple bonnet and eyes the color of warm honey. Her dress was plain but well-maintained, the kind worn by someone who had known better days but refused to let hardship diminish her dignity. What struck him most was not her appearance, though she was undeniably beautiful, but the fact that she was looking directly at him, speaking to him as though he were a human being worthy of basic courtesy. "Thank you, miss," he said quietly, taking the glove from her outstretched hand. Their fingers brushed for just a moment, and he saw something flicker in her expression, though he could not quite name it. "You are welcome," she replied, and then she smiled. It was a small smile, tentative and perhaps a bit sad, but it was genuine. Austin felt something crack open in his chest, some sealed-off place he had locked away to survive the last 3 months of relentless ostracism. Before he could say anything else, Mrs. Henderson appeared at the woman's elbow, her face pinched with disapproval. "Miss Dawson, we really must be going. Your aunt will be expecting us." The young woman, Miss Dawson apparently, nodded but kept her eyes on Austin for a moment longer. "Have a good day, sir," she said softly, and then she was gone, swept out of the store by Mrs. Henderson's insistent hand on her arm. Austin stood in the doorway, watching her walk down the street, and for the first time in months, he felt something other than the dull ache of loneliness. He did not even know her first name, but she had spoken to him. She had smiled at him. It should not have mattered so much, but it did. Over the next week, Austin found himself hoping to see her again, though he told himself he was being foolish. He learned from careful eavesdropping at the post office that her name was Diana Dawson Reeves, that she was a widow who had come to live with her aunt after her husband died in a mining accident somewhere in Colorado, and that she had only been in Alta for about a month. She kept mostly to herself, helping her elderly aunt with housework and occasionally working at the small lending library that operated out of the back room of the church. It was at the library that Austin finally saw her again. He had never been much of a reader, but he found himself pushing open the church's side door on a Tuesday afternoon, drawn by the knowledge that she might be there. The room was small and smelled of old paper and beeswax. Shelves lined the walls, packed with donated books in various states of repair. And there, behind a simple wooden desk, sat Diana Dawson Reeves, carefully mending the spine of a leather-bound volume. She looked up when she heard the door, and her face brightened with recognition. "Hello," she said warmly. "I hoped I might see you again." Austin removed his hat, suddenly feeling awkward and uncertain. "I thought I might borrow a book if that is all right. Of course, that is what they are here for." She set down her work and stood smoothing her skirts. "Are you looking for anything in particular?" "I am not much of a reader, to be honest," Austin admitted. "Maybe something not too long." Diana walked along the shelves, her fingers trailing over the spines with obvious affection. "Do you like stories of adventure? Or perhaps something more philosophical? Adventure sounds good." She pulled down a slim volume and brought it to him. "This is about explorers in the Arctic. It is exciting but not overly long. I think you might enjoy it." Austin took the book, their hands touching again in that same brief, electric way. "Thank you, Miss Reeves. Please call me Diana." She hesitated, then added, "And you are Austin Drake." He watched her face carefully, waiting for recognition to dawn, for her expression to shudder the way everyone else's did when they heard his name. But Diana only nodded, as if filing the information away without judgment. "It is nice to properly meet you, Austin Drake. You should know," he said before he could stop himself, "that most people in this town would not want to see you being friendly with me." Diana tilted her head slightly, studying him with those honey-colored eyes. "Why is that?" "Because they think I am a cheat and a scoundrel, because I did not fight back when a man shot me, and that makes me a coward in their eyes." "Did you cheat?" "No." "Are you a scoundrel?" "No." "Then I cannot see why their opinions should matter to me." She said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Besides, I know something about being judged unfairly." Austin wanted to ask what she meant, but something in her expression told him that particular story was not ready to be shared. Instead, he said, "Thank you for the book. And for not crossing the street when you see me coming." Diana smiled that small, sad smile again. "I will be here every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon if you want to come back and tell me what you thought of it." Austin left the church feeling lighter than he had in months. He read the book in 3 days, mostly by lamplight after finishing his work each evening, and found himself back at the library the following Thursday, eager to discuss it with Diana. She was there, as promised, and her face lit up when he walked in. "You finished it already," she said, clearly pleased. "Could not put it down," Austin replied, and it was true. But he also knew that his eagerness to finish had less to do with the explorers and their frozen ship, and more to do with wanting an excuse to come back to this small room and talk to the woman who treated him like a person. They talked for over an hour that day. Diana asked him questions about what he had thought of certain scenes, and he found himself opening up in ways he had not with anyone in a long time. She was intelligent and well-read, with opinions of her own that she was not afraid to share. When he finally forced himself to leave, she handed him another book and told him she looked forward to seeing him again. So began a pattern that would define the next several weeks. Austin came to the library twice a week, always with a book to return and always leaving with a new one. Their conversations stretched longer each time, moving from literature to their lives, their hopes, their disappointments. Diana told him about her late husband, a kind but restless man who had dragged her from town to town chasing rumors of silver strikes, never quite finding the fortune he dreamed of. She had loved him, she said, but it had been an exhausting love, always shadowed by worry and instability. When he died, she said quietly one afternoon, I felt terrible for feeling relieved. Not that he was gone, but that I could finally stop moving, stop worrying. Does that make me a horrible person? No, Austen said firmly. It makes you human. She looked at him with such gratitude that he wanted to reach across the space between them and take her hand, but he did not. He was still the town pariah, and she was a respectable widow. He would not risk her reputation for his own selfish desires. Austen, in turn, told her about his family back in Missouri, about the falling out with his father that had sent him west looking for a fresh start. He told her about the shooting, about Caldwell's lies, about the way an entire town could turn on you overnight when someone with money and influence decided you were expendable. I keep thinking I should just leave, he said. Go somewhere else and start over again. But you have not, Diana observed. No, I suppose I am too stubborn. Or maybe I just want to prove that I can endure it. Or maybe, she said gently, you are still hoping things will get better. He looked at her, at the warmth in her eyes and the soft curve of her mouth, and thought that perhaps things already had gotten better, at least a little bit. The town, however, did not share his optimism. Word spread quickly that Diana Reeves was spending time with Austen Drake, and the whispers started almost immediately. Mrs. Henderson tried to warn Diana away from him, telling her in no uncertain terms that association with such a man would ruin whatever small social standing she had managed to establish. Diana listened politely, and then continued to greet Austen warmly every time she saw him. Her aunt, a practical woman named Margaret who had lived in Alta for 30 years, was more direct. That boy has been marked by this town, she told Diana over supper one evening. Fairly or not, they have decided he is not worth their time. If you keep being friendly with him, they will decide the same about you. Then let them, Diana said calmly. I have already lost one life, Aunt Margaret. I will not spend this one living by the narrow-minded rules of people who judge without knowing the truth. Margaret sighed but did not argue further. She had watched her niece arrive in Alta hollow-eyed and exhausted, worn down by years of poverty and uncertainty. In the past month, she had seen Diana slowly come back to life, and she suspected Austen Drake had something to do with that transformation. If the town wanted to make trouble over it, well, Margaret Dawson had weathered worse storms in her 7 decades. Austen, for his part, was acutely aware of the risk Diana was taking by continuing to associate with him. He tried to stay away, told himself that he should not be selfish, that she deserved better than to be dragged down by his tainted reputation. But then Thursday would come, and his feet would carry him to the library as if they had a will of their own, and Diana would smile at him with such genuine happiness that all his noble intentions crumbled to dust. It was on a cold October afternoon, with the first hints of winter beginning to creep down from the mountains, that everything changed. Austen had come to the library as usual and found Diana closing up early. Her hands were shaking as she locked the cash box, and her eyes were red-rimmed. "What happened?" Austen asked immediately, crossing the room to her side. "Nothing," she said, but her voice broke on the word. "I am fine. Diana." He said her name softly, and she looked up at him with such raw pain that he did not think, did not hesitate. He simply wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close, letting her bury her face against his chest as she finally let herself cry. They stood like that for a long time, her tears soaking into his shirt while he held her and murmured useless, soothing words. When she finally pulled back, wiping at her eyes with embarrassment, he kept his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. "Tell me," he said quietly. "Mrs. Caldwell came by this morning," Diana said, her voice thick with emotion. "She told me that if I continued to spend time with you, the library would be closed, that the church would withdraw its support because they could not have a woman of questionable morals managing their books." Austin felt anger surge hot and sharp through his veins. Of course it was Caldwell's wife, doing her husband's dirty work, trying to isolate him even further. "Then we will stop," he said, though the words felt like swallowing broken glass. "I will not let you lose this because of me. No." Diana's hands came up to grip his arms, her fingers digging in with surprising strength. "No, I am not letting them win. I am not letting them tell me who I can and cannot speak to. Diana, you do not understand what you are risking." "Yes, I do." She looked up at him, her honey-colored eyes fierce despite the tears still clinging to her lashes. "I understand perfectly. And I also understand that you are the only person in this entire town who has treated me like I have a mind of my own, who talks to me about books and ideas, and does not just see a convenient pair of hands to do someone else's work. Do you think I have not noticed that every conversation I have with anyone else revolves around my dead husband or my duty to my aunt or the proper way to behave? You are the only one who asks me what I think, what I want. That does not mean you should throw away your reputation for me. My reputation." She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Let me tell you about my reputation, Austin. Back in Colorado, after my husband died, do you know what people said? They said I must have been a terrible wife to drive him to such reckless behavior. They said that if I had been more supportive, more dutiful, he might still be alive. They said that a good woman would have stopped him from going into that mine. So I came here, to a place where nobody knew me, hoping for a fresh start. And what did I find? More judgment, more people telling me how to live, who to speak to, what to feel." She stepped closer, and Austin's heart hammered in his chest. "So if they want to ruin my reputation for treating you with basic human decency, then let them. I am tired of living my life according to other people's rules." "Diana," he breathed, and then he was cupping her face in his hands, tilting her head up, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She did not. Instead, she rose up on her toes and kissed him, soft and tentative at first, then deeper, more certain. Austin felt the world narrow down to just this. Just her, the taste of her tears and the warmth of her body against his, the way she sighed against his mouth as if she had been waiting for this as long as he had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Austin pressed his forehead to hers. "I am in love with you," he said, the words tumbling out before he could question them. "I think I have been since the moment you handed me that glove in the general store." "I am in love with you too," Diana whispered back. "And I am not letting this town take that away from us." But the town had other ideas. When word spread that Deanna Reeves had been seen kissing Austin Drake in the church library, the response was swift and brutal. The church council voted to close the library entirely rather than allow Deanna to continue managing it. Mrs. Caldwell organized a group of women to formally shun Deanna, refusing to speak to her or acknowledge her presence. Even some of the shopkeepers began to turn her away, declaring that they could not serve someone of such low character. Diana's aunt stood by her, but Austin could see the toll it was taking. Deanna tried to put on a brave face, but he saw the way her shoulders sagged when another door closed in her face, the way her smile became more and more forced. He hated it, hated that loving him had cost her so much. Hated that he seemed to bring nothing but trouble to the people who dared to care about him. Maybe I should leave, he said one evening as they sat together on the porch of her aunt's house, hidden from the street by the gathering darkness. Go somewhere else, and you could rebuild your life here. Stop saying that, Diana said sharply. I do not want to rebuild a life here without you. If you leave, I am coming with you. Diana. I mean it, Austin. We could go somewhere new, both of us. Somewhere nobody knows our names or our histories. We could start fresh. It was tempting, so tempting that Austin could almost taste it. But something held him back, some stubborn core of pride that refused to let Caldwell and his cronies win so completely. I do not want to spend the rest of my life running, he said slowly. Always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if the past will catch up with us. I want to be able to hold my head up and know that I did nothing wrong. Then what do we do? Austin was quiet for a long moment, thinking. An idea had been forming in the back of his mind for weeks now, ever since this had all started. It was risky, maybe even dangerous, but it might be their only chance at something resembling justice. I am going to confront Caldwell, he said finally. Publicly. I am going to make him either prove his accusations or admit that he lied. Diana's hand tightened on his. He will never admit to lying. Men like him never do, maybe not. But if I can get him to make his accusations in front of enough witnesses, people who know me, who have done business with me, maybe some of them will start to question his story. Maybe doubt is all I need. Or maybe he will shoot you again, and this time he will not miss. Austin turned to look at her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Would you rather I spend the rest of my life as a coward in everyone's eyes? Would you rather we live in the shadows, always hiding, always ashamed? I would rather you live, period, Diana said fiercely. I do not care what anyone thinks of you. I know who you are. But I care, Austin said softly. Not because I need their approval, but because I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror. I need to know that I stood up for the truth, even if nobody believes me. Diana closed her eyes and he could see her internal struggle playing out across her features. Finally, she nodded. All right, but I am coming with you. If you are going to do this, you are not doing it alone. Diana, that is not a good idea. I do not care if it is a good idea, I am coming. There was no point in arguing with her once she had that look in her eyes. Austin recognized it well by now, so he simply kissed her forehead and said, All right, together then. They waited until Saturday, when the town would be busiest, when the most people would be around to witness whatever was about to unfold. Austin dressed carefully that morning, putting on his best shirt and vest, making sure his appearance was as respectable as possible. Diana met him at the end of her aunt's street, looking pale but determined in a dark blue dress that brought out the amber in her eyes. Are you sure about this? She asked one last time. No, Austin admitted, but I am doing it anyway. They walked into town together, hands clasped, and Austin felt the familiar wave of hostile stares washing over them. He kept his head up, his spine straight, and tried to channel all his fear and anger into something resembling confidence. They found Caldwell exactly where Austin had expected, holding court outside the saloon with a group of his ranch hands and business associates. Caldwell saw them coming and his expression darkened. Well, he drawled loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear. If it is not the town coward and his whore. Diana flinched, but Austin squeezed her hand and kept walking until they were standing directly in front of Caldwell. The crowd that had been milling about began to gather closer, sensing drama. I want you to repeat your accusations, Austin said clearly, his voice carrying across the street. All of them. Right here, right now, in front of everyone. Caldwell laughed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. Why would I waste my breath? Everyone already knows what you are. Then it should be easy for you to say it again. Tell everyone here exactly what you accused me of. Tell them about the card games where I supposedly cheated. Name the specific games. Name the people I was playing with." A murmur went through the crowd. Several men exchanged glances. Austin pressed on. "Tell them about the married women I supposedly seduced. Give them names, dates, any kind of proof at all." "I do not have to prove anything to you," Caldwell snarled, but his face was reddening. "No, you do not," Austin agreed, "but you might have to prove it to them." He gestured to the gathered crowd, which had grown substantially in just the past few minutes. "Because I think there are plenty of people here who have known me for 2 years, who have worked with me, done business with me. And I think some of them might be starting to wonder why you have never provided a single shred of evidence for any of your claims." "I know why," Diana spoke up, her voice clear and strong despite the tremble Austin could feel in her hand. "It is because he shot you while drunk and needed an excuse to justify his own violence. So he made up lies, terrible lies, and hoped that his money and influence would make people believe them without question." "You shut your mouth," Caldwell snapped at her. "You are nothing but a gold-digging widow who latched onto the only man desperate enough to have you." Austin moved before he could think, stepping between Caldwell and Diana, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Do not speak to her that way." "Or what?" Caldwell pushed forward, his breath reeking of whiskey even at this early hour. "You going to hit me? That would just prove me right, would it not?" "No," said a voice from the crowd. "It would prove you are a liar." Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was one of Caldwell's own ranch hands, a young man named Tom who Austin had helped pull out of a flooded creek the previous spring. "I was there the night you shot Mr. Drake," Tom continued, his voice shaking but determined. "We all were, and he never did nothing to you. You were drunk and angry because you had lost money at cards fair and square, and you were looking for someone to blame." "You are fired," Caldwell hissed. "I quit yesterday," Tom shot back. "Because I could not work for a man who lies and bullies people and then acts like he is better than everyone else." Another voice spoke up, this one belonging to the owner of the feed store. "Austin Drake has bought supplies from me for 2 years now. Always pays on time, always honest about his needs, never given me a moment's trouble." "Same here," added the blacksmith. "Shod his horses regular. Good man far as I can tell." More voices began to join in, not many but enough. People who had done business with Austin, who had worked alongside him, who remembered small kindnesses or moments of integrity. The tide was not turning exactly, but it was beginning to shift, and everyone could feel it. Caldwell's face had gone from red to purple. "You are all fools," he spat. "Taken in by a smooth talker." "The only smooth talker around here is you," Diana said coldly, "and people are finally starting to see through it." For a moment, Austin thought Caldwell might actually take a swing at one of them. The older man's hands were clenched, his body tense with rage. But then Sheriff Morrison pushed through the crowd, his weathered face unreadable. "That is enough," the sheriff said firmly. "Caldwell, go home and sleep it off. Drake, you and Miss Reeves should probably do the same." It was not the vindication Austin had hoped for, not exactly. The sheriff was not declaring him innocent or condemning Caldwell. But it was something. It was acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, the story people had been told was not the whole truth. As the crowd began to disperse, several people nodded at Austin as they passed. Some even offered tentative smiles. It was not acceptance, not yet, but it was the first crack in the wall of hostility that had surrounded him for months. Diana leaned against him, and Austin wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her close. They stood there for a moment, just breathing, just being. "That was either very brave or very stupid," Diana finally said. "Probably both," Austin admitted. "But I meant what I said. I am done living in the shadows." Over the following weeks, things began to change in small, incremental ways. The feed store owner greeted Austin by name when he came in. The blacksmith stopped by his ranch to discuss a project. Mrs. Henderson did not smile at Diana, but she did not cross the street to avoid her either. It was progress. Slow and uncertain, but progress nonetheless. Caldwell, for his part, seemed to retreat into his ranch, appearing in town less and less frequently. The rumors said his drinking had gotten worse, that his business was suffering. Austin tried not to take satisfaction in it, but he could not quite manage it. The man had nearly destroyed his life, and he was only human. On a clear November morning, with the mountains white with fresh snow, Austin rode into town with a specific purpose in mind. He found Diana at her aunt's house, helping with the baking, and asked if she would take a walk with him. They ended up at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land and the view stretched out for miles in every direction. The air was cold and crisp, and their breath fogged in the morning light. "I have been thinking," Austin said, taking both of Diana's hands in his. "About the future, about what I want my life to look like." "And what do you want?" Diana asked softly. "I want you," he said simply. "I want to marry you, build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to make you happy if you will let me." Diana's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Austin, I will marry you." He kissed her there, with the mountains as witnesses and the future spreading out before them like an unwritten page. It was not a proposal born of grand gestures or expensive rings. It was simply two people who had found each other in the midst of hardship and chosen to hold on tight. They were married a month later in a small ceremony at Margaret's house. The gathering was tiny, just Margaret, Tom the ranch hand, the feed store owner and his wife, and a handful of others who had come to believe in Austin's innocence and Diana's courage. It was not the big church wedding that Diana might have dreamed of as a girl, but it was perfect in its own way, full of genuine warmth and affection from people who actually cared about them. Austin moved into Margaret's house temporarily while they saved money to build a small addition onto his ranch. It was crowded and sometimes awkward, but also filled with laughter and quiet moments of domestic happiness that Austin had never thought he would experience. Diana was a revelation, funny and sharp and affectionate in ways that constantly surprised him. She challenged him, supported him, loved him with a fierceness that took his breath away. The town continued its slow thaw toward them. When Diana became pregnant in the spring of 1883, Mrs. Henderson actually stopped by with a basket of baby clothes, her manner still stiff but her gesture genuine. It was a small thing, but it meant the world to Diana, who had been quietly grieving the loss of the female friendships and community she had hoped to find in Alta. Their son was born in October of 1883, a healthy baby with his mother's eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him James after Austin's grandfather, and Austin wept when he first held him, overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility and love and hope that this tiny person represented. Margaret doted on her great-nephew, and the house rang with the sounds of a baby's cries and gurgles, and the soft lullabies Diana sang when she rocked him to sleep. Austin worked harder than ever, determined to finish the addition to his ranch so they could move into their own space. He wanted to give Diana and James a real home, a place where they could grow and thrive without feeling like they were imposing on Margaret's generosity. By the summer of 1884, the addition was complete, and they moved into their new home with great excitement and no small amount of chaos. It was just 3 rooms, simple and rough around the edges, but it was theirs. Diana decorated with curtains she had sewn herself and furniture Austin had built during the long winter evenings. They planted a garden, adopted a dog that showed up one day and refused to leave, and slowly built the life they had both been dreaming of. The ranch work was hard, but Austin had never been afraid of hard work. He raised cattle and horses, selling them to buyers who came through from Salt Lake City and beyond. His reputation as an honest dealer spread, and business improved steadily year after year. Diana kept the books and managed the household, and together they proved to be an effective team. In 1886, their daughter was born, a tiny thing with a powerful set of lungs and her father's stubborn streak. They named her Clara, and James, now nearly 3, was fascinated by his new sister. Austin watched his children play together and marveled at the strange twists of fate that had brought him to this place, this life. If Caldwell had not shot him, if the town had not turned against him, if Diana had not been brave enough to speak to him despite the risks, none of this would exist. Caldwell himself died in 1887, falling from his horse while drunk and breaking his neck. Austin felt no joy at the news, only a distant sadness for a wasted life. The man's widow sold the ranch and moved east, and gradually, Caldwell's lies faded into distant memory, replaced by newer scandals and dramas. By 1890, Austin and Diana were among the most respected families in Alta. It had taken years, patience, and consistent proof of their character, but the town had finally accepted them. Austin served on the town council. Diana reopened the library, this time in a dedicated building that the town had voted to fund. She filled it with books donated from all over the territory, and presided over it with quiet pride, creating a space where anyone, regardless of their past or their reputation, could come and learn and dream. Their life was not without challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick livestock and lean years. Diana had a miscarriage in 1891 that left them both grieving for the child who would never be. But they weathered each storm together, their love deepening and maturing with each passing year. In 1895, when Austin was 35 and Diana 34, they welcomed their third child, another son they named Samuel. James was now 12, Clara 9, and both were fascinated by their new brother. The house felt full and chaotic and absolutely perfect. Austin would sometimes think back to that day in the general store, when a young widow had handed him a glove and smiled at him like he was worth something. It had been such a small moment, barely worth noting in the grand scheme of things, but it had changed everything. It had given him hope when he had none, companionship when he was isolated, and eventually, love when he had thought himself unworthy of it. Diana told him once, years later, that she had been terrified that day. Terrified to speak to him, terrified of drawing the town's ire, terrified of taking a risk when her life already felt so precarious. But she had looked at him and seen something familiar in his eyes, the same loneliness and quiet desperation she felt every day. And she had thought, just for a moment, that maybe they could help each other bear it. "I never regretted it," she told him, curled up against his side in their bed, the house quiet around them with the children asleep. "Not for a single moment, even when things were hardest. You were worth it, Austin. You have always been worth it." Austin pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair, his heart so full he thought it might burst. "I spent every day trying to make sure you would not regret choosing me," he said softly. "Trying to be the man you believed I was, even when I was not sure I believed it myself." "You were always that man," Diana said firmly. "You just needed someone to see it." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, secure in the knowledge that they had built something real and lasting from the ashes of shame and isolation. Their love had not been easy or simple, but it had been true, and that had made all the difference. The years continued to roll by, each one adding new layers to their story. James grew into a thoughtful young man who inherited his mother's love of books and his father's steady work ethic. Clara became a skilled rider and horsewoman, fearless and bright and determined to see the world beyond Alta someday. Samuel was the baby of the family, sweet-natured and curious about everything. In 1902, when Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83, Diana and Austin held each other and grieved for the woman who had stood by them when no one else would. They buried her in the town cemetery with full honors, and it seemed as if half of Alta turned out to pay their respects to a woman who had been a pillar of the community for over 50 years. James left for university in Salt Lake City in 1903, studying to become a lawyer. Diana cried when they put him on the train, and Austin held her hand tightly, both of them proud and terrified in equal measure. Clara followed 2 years later, determined to become a teacher. Samuel, still just a boy, declared that he would stay and run the ranch someday, and Austin felt a fierce swell of pride at his son's loyalty and ambition. By 1910, Austin was 50 and Diana was 49, and they were entering the season of life where children became adults and grandchildren began to appear. James married a smart young woman from Salt Lake City and brought her home to meet his parents. Clara was engaged to a teacher she had met at the school where she worked. Samuel was 17, tall and strong, already doing most of the heavy work on the ranch. Austin and Diana would sit on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, and talk about everything and nothing. They reminisced about the early days, the fear and uncertainty, and the fierce determination that had carried them through. They marveled at how their children had turned out, at the grandchildren who were beginning to arrive. They made plans for the future, even as they acknowledged that they were entering the final chapters of their own story. "You ever wish things had been different?" Diana asked him one evening. "That we had not had to fight so hard for acceptance?" Austin considered the question carefully. "Maybe it would have been easier," he said finally, "but I do not know if we would have appreciated it as much. Everything we have, we built together. Nobody handed it to us. That means something." Diana nodded, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You are right, and I think it made us stronger too, made our love stronger." "You made me stronger," Austin said, turning to look at her. Her hair was more gray than auburn now, and there were lines around her eyes and mouth, but she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "I was drowning before I met you, Diana, drowning in loneliness and shame. You threw me a lifeline and you never let go, even when holding on would have been easier." "We saved each other," Diana said simply. "That is what love is supposed to do." Their first grandchild, a girl named Margaret after Diana's aunt, was born in 1911. Diana wept when she held her, this tiny new life that represented continuity and hope, and the future stretching out beyond her own lifetime. Austin watched his wife cradle their granddaughter and felt a contentment so deep and complete that it brought tears to his own eyes. In 1915, as the world beyond Utah erupted into war and chaos, Alta remained a peaceful refuge where life continued at its own steady pace. Austin and Diana, now in their mid-50s, had officially retired from active ranch work, turning over daily operations to Samuel and his new wife. They spent their days tending their garden, reading, taking long walks, and spoiling their growing collection of grandchildren. The library that Diana had rebuilt had become a cornerstone of the community, with programs for children and adults alike. She had trained a younger woman to take over as head librarian, but Diana still volunteered several days a week, unable to fully give up the work that had meant so much to her. Austen often joined her there, repairing shelves or helping move heavy boxes of donated books, content to work quietly in her presence the way he had been all those years ago. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1914, their children threw them a surprise party that brought together what seemed like the entire town. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and music, and Austen stood with his arm around Diana's waist, looking out at all these people who had once shunned them and now celebrated with them, and felt the weight of their journey settle over him like a blessing. "Thank you," he whispered to Diana as they danced together, surrounded by friends and family, "for taking a chance on me, for being brave when I could not be, for loving me when nobody else thought I was worth loving." "You were always worth loving," Diana said, her eyes shining with tears and joy. "Always, Austen, from that very first moment." They continued dancing, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of meaning and purpose and love from the ruins of rejection and despair. Their story was not one of grand adventures or dramatic rescues. It was quieter than that, more enduring. It was the story of choosing each other day after day, year after year, through hardship and joy and everything in between. As they grew older still, moving into their 60s and then 70s, they remained each other's closest companion and greatest advocate. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin to have children of their own. They saw Alta transform from a rough frontier town into a more established community with schools and churches and businesses. They witnessed the world change around them, but their love remained constant, the one fixed point in a shifting landscape. Austen died peacefully in his sleep in 1932, at the age of 72, with Diana holding his hand. He had lived a long, full life, far richer than he ever could have imagined during those dark months when he walked through town as an outcast. His last words to Diana were simple: "No regrets." Not a single one. Diana grieved deeply, but also knew a quiet gratitude that they had been given so many years together. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, spending her days in the library she loved and her evenings remembering the man who had been her partner in every sense of the word. When she died in 1940, at the age of 79, they buried her next to Austen in the town cemetery, under the wide Utah sky they had both loved. Their children, now elderly themselves, stood together at the graveside and told stories about their parents, about a love that had endured despite everything that had tried to break it. The library that Diana had built and nurtured for so many years remained, a lasting testament to her belief in the power of knowledge and community. On the wall near the entrance, a brass plaque was installed that read, "In memory of Diana Dawson Reeves Drake, who believed everyone deserved kindness and a second chance." And perhaps that was the truest legacy of their love story. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but the simple, radical act of seeing another person's humanity when the world had decided they were unworthy of it. Of choosing compassion over judgment, courage over comfort, love over fear. They had been two lonely people in a town that had turned its back on them, but they had found each other and built something beautiful. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.